So the Lewis and Clark expedition was absolutely, they had no idea what they were out there looking for. They even thought they would see woolly mammoths on this journey, and they saw things that they had never seen before. And it was just a big eye-opener, and they would bring animals back to Thomas Jefferson, animals they'd never seen before. They'd never seen a grizzly bear before. They'd never seen a prairie dog before. And at first they called the prairie dog the barking squirrel because that's what it looked like. And one of the soldiers said, you know, that barking sounds just like a dog. And since they live on the prairie, they named it the prairie dog. So lots of new species were discovered during the Lewis and Clark expedition. And it was a very, very important journey. So after the Lewis and Clark expedition, we're going to move on, and we are actually going to move on to another war, and this is the War of 1812. Now you can take a look. The War of 1812 started in 1812. Believe it or not, the War of 1812, if you look at the picture, the United States back at war with England. And this time, well, I should say again, it was the United States that declared war on England. So let's kind of learn a little bit about it. I'm not going to talk too much about it. War of 1812. Why are they fighting? Well, what you need to know is back in Europe, England and France are at war. And England, during that war, put up a blockade to stop trade between France and the United States of America. And this made the United States of America very angry. They did not like their trade with France being blockaded. So that was part of it. Another thing that upset the United States of America was that England was using their Navy ships to stop American Navy ships and was boarding American Navy ships and literally kidnapping American soldiers, basically saying, hey, you're not an American soldier, you're an English soldier. Remember, the war's now only been over for about 30 years. It's not that long after the Revolutionary War ended and the Americans separated from England. And so England was basically kidnapping American sailors. And so America was like, absolutely not. They declare war on England. So they're fighting and they're fighting and they're fighting. And the war is going to last a total of 3 years. After about 2 years of fighting, England and France, their war is over. And so really there's no more reason to keep the blockade of France and the United States of America. So the blockade disappears. Since the blockade is no longer there, part of what made the United States angry is gone. And so about 2 years into this war, America and England sign a peace treaty. But there is no email, there is no Twitter and text. And so even though they signed the peace treaty, news of this peace treaty didn't reach where the fighting was, which was in America. And so even after the peace treaty was signed, some of the most major and monumental events of the war happened. First of all, after the peace treaty was signed, the British burned the United States capital of Washington, D.C. During this burning, the White House was burnt to the ground. So the White House that you know today was actually a rebuilt version of the original White House that was built by George Washington. And then also, after the peace treaty was signed, the most major battle of the entire war was fought. It was the Battle of New Orleans, and the leader of the American army at the time was General Andrew Jackson, and he really became a hero during this battle. And it was because of this battle that General Andrew Jackson, the general of the United States Army during the War of 1812, will eventually become President Andrew Jackson. So he will take over as president later on. So the War of 1812 ends, and when you ask who won the War of 1812, the answer is nobody. It actually ended in a stalemate. After a couple years of fighting, both sides lost their reason for fighting. And so therefore they were like, okay, we don't really have any reason to fight. Let's end this war. So really it was a stalemate, if you know anything about chess. Neither side really won or lost the War of 1812, although we definitely lost our nation's capital. It burnt to the ground and we needed to have it rebuilt. So the War of 1812 was over in 1815. You guys, just a couple things that you might be interested in knowing. In 1819, the United States of America makes a deal with Spain. Spain has this land, La Florida, that is so far away from all the other land that it owns that it's kind of useless to them. So we actually make a trade. We give Spain some land that is kind of more connected to their land, and we get in return Florida. So we actually get Florida with a handshake, not with a war or not buying it. It's sort of a trade, which is kind of interesting. Something that will make sense a little bit later on. The same way that the colonists, the American colonists, got their independence from England and became the United States of America, Mexico is going to have their own Revolutionary War. Mexico is owned by Spain. Mexico doesn't want to be owned by Spain, so Mexico goes to war with Spain. They have their own Mexican Revolutionary War, and Mexico wins. So Mexico actually gains its independence from Spain. And so now this is no longer New Spain, the way that we've been viewing it. It is now Mexico, its own country. This is the best story I can possibly tell you. Texas, you guys all know, is a state in the United States of America. It became the 28th state. But before Texas was a state, Texas was actually its own country, and it was called the Republic of Texas. So I'm going to tell you a very quick story about that. So Texas once belonged to Mexico. It wasn't pronounced Texas, it was pronounced Tejas. And Tejas was land in Mexico that Mexico owned. The problem was that not enough people lived in Tejas. And if people aren't living in a place, then Mexico can't get tax money from that place. So Mexico wanted more people to live in Tejas. So they opened it up and said to Americans, hey, Americans, tired of following America's rules? Well, move to Mexico and you can live in a part of Mexico called Tejas, where you don't have to follow America's rules and you don't have to pay America's taxes. So a bunch of Americans moved to Tejas. The problem was, the Americans that moved to Tejas, they didn't want to follow American rules, but they didn't want to follow Mexican rules either. And so Mexico was having a hard time getting these Texan Americans to follow and pay the taxes and follow the rules that Mexico wants them to follow. So the Americans living in Tejas decide they don't want to be part of Mexico. So they actually have a Revolutionary War. We have the Texans versus the Mexicans, and it's known as the Texan or Texas Revolution. And this war lasts a long time, from 1824 until 1836. Part of this war, if you've ever heard of the story of the Alamo, is part of the Texan Revolution. And believe it or not, it's amazing how it happened. The people living in Tejas actually beat Mexico's army. And so they became their own separate country. And for a while, Tejas was known as Texas, and it was its own country, the Republic of Texas. The problem is that they quickly realized as a country, they're very weak. They don't have an army, they don't have a lot of money, and it would be really hard for them if Mexico decided to declare war on them again to defend themselves and win again. So at this point, Texas begged the United States of America to let them in as a state in the United States of America. And so that was how Texas became the 28th state in our country. They were once their own country because they declared their independence from Mexico, but then they realized they were weak and needed to be part of a bigger country, a stronger country, so they asked the United States of America to pull them in as the 28th state. So, interesting story. Kind of moving along, in 1846, this guy writes a newspaper article, and in this newspaper article, he declares that the United States of America has this thing called the Manifest Destiny. And Manifest Destiny, in more terms, is he's saying that it is the right, and it is not just our right, it is our obligation, it is our duty to take all the land in the West from where we own it to the Pacific Ocean. That's our destiny. It's our right. It's our obligation. We must do it. The problem is we don't own land that is from us to the west. That land belongs to Mexico. And so because now Americans believe that it's our right, it's our destiny to own this land, we go ahead and take it. Problem is it belongs to Mexico, so we fight them for it. And from 1846 through 1848, we go to war. America goes to war with Mexico. It's called the Mexican-American War. Long story short, the United States of America wins. So what that means for us is we have all the land we won in the Revolutionary War. We have all the land we bought in Louisiana Purchase. We have Florida now. Now, we just fought for and won all of this land in pink. We didn't win all of Mexico. We didn't want all of Mexico. We wanted all the land to the Pacific Ocean. So Mexico is still down here. We now just won all of this land in pink, which is awesome. And that includes California. So, in 1849, people who were in California found gold. Gold was found in California. And so all the people living in the United States in the East rushed over to California because they wanted to get a piece of the treasure. And so this rush to California to get gold was known as the California Gold Rush. If you're ever wondering, the San Francisco 49ers, they're called the 49ers because that was the year when the gold rush started. People started rushing to California to get their hands on that gold. It was hard for people to get to California, and it was a long journey, and from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So that was when they decided to build railroads that reached from the East Coast to the West Coast of our country. And that was how the railroad system got put in the middle of the 1800s. And ladies and gentlemen, it is time to move into the Civil War. You now know how our country got bigger, whether it was winning the Revolutionary War and getting the Ohio Territory. And then it was Thomas Jefferson with a handshake and spending $15 million, doubling the size of our country with the Louisiana Purchase. We have a deal with Spain to get La Florida. We believe it's our destiny, the manifest destiny, to own all the land to the west. And so we fight Mexico in the Mexican-American War. There's so many things that got us the land that we have, and that's it in a nutshell.